so here the psalmist is demonstrating that I know that we were on the verge of being destroyed. But God stepped in and intervened in our life. I don't know about you, but there's been many situations where God has stepped in my situation. And when he stepped in, he showed up and he showed out. Somebody gonna help me preach this thing. That there were times when my family couldn't do it. My friends weren't there. And I didn't have nowhere to turn. But God stepped in. He was on my side. And he helped me to deal with my situation. Twice in this text, the psalmist proclaimed, if it Lord who was on our side. That's an acknowledgement that if God wasn't there, the outcome would have been worse than what it is. If God wasn't there, that favor wouldn't have been cast upon me. If God wasn't there, the blessings wouldn't have come. I wouldn't have been able to make it through my valley situations. Somebody in this place can testify, if it had not been. I'm pretty confident that if I ask everybody in here, somebody can have an historic look back over your life, and you can proclaim like the children of Israel, if it had not been. When I was out there that night, if it had not been. When I needed to pay my bills, if it had not been. When I was in the hospital and the doctors didn't know what was going on, if it had not been for the Lord on my side. Somebody with just a scratch and a bruise, and they can testify, if it had not been the Lord on their side. Somebody had their backs against the wall with paying your bills, and somehow, some way, God showed up, and now you can testify, if it had not been for the Lord on my side. Somebody was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you made the wrong decision, and you look back at what damage that decision could have done in your life, but you can shout right now, if it had not been for the Lord who was on our side. Twice in these two verses, the psalmist proclaims that God is on the side of his people. And then he demonstrates how important that is by going on to describe what would have happened had God not been on their side. And this gives me even more encouragement that we serve a God that'll be on your side without condition. You understand, the children of Israel wasn't always doing the right thing as a nation. But even in their disobedience, God still showed up and still blessed them in their life. Somebody in here ought to lose your mind, because you know you hadn't always done the right thing by God. You know you hadn't always been where you are right now. And you know you turned your back on God sometimes. But the good news is that even though we turn our back on God, we serve a God who has never turned his back on us. Some of y'all gonna catch this on your way home, and you're gonna be riding down your car, and you're gonna say, if it had not been. There are three things that I see in this text to help us to understand that the Lord is on our side. The first thing in this text I see is the credit. If you're writing, you can write that down, the credit. David proclaims as the psalmist, he says, if it had not been for the Lord. For some of y'all this morning is, who is on the other side of your if? Who is on the other side of your if? For some, it's your mother, maybe your father. For some, your friend. Some, maybe your money or something else. But can I tell you, there should be some folk in here and that give credit where credit is due. And say it wasn't my mama, it wasn't my daddy, wasn't my friend, wasn't my money, wasn't my looks, wasn't my economic status. But it was only the Lord who, by being on my side, has brought me through whatever I have experienced in my life. And the problem is, some of us come here on Sunday morning and act like we doing God a favor. Can I tell you, if you realize that God is the only one who deserves the credit for where you are, somebody ought to come in here with the praise in your spirit. You shouldn't have to wait for the choir to sing. You shouldn't have to wait for the preacher to get happy. You shouldn't have to wait till the third point of the sermon. When you think about the goodness of Jesus and you know that it was only God who could get you where you are right now, somebody ought to have a thank you in your spirit. Somebody in here can testify, to God be the glory for the things he has done. He didn't say to God be the glory for the things we have done. But I can give credit where credit is due. Can I tell you, Israel faced some powerful enemies that they could not handle on their own. The Babylonians had them in pressuring them and about to swallow them. But whatever their foes were, they could not handle their deliverance from their own situation. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't get themselves oppressing them day by day. And just like Israel, sir, many of us in here who have enemies that we deal with. And if you know that you have enemies that you deal with and oppression in your life, things that you face, temptations you can't get by, but yet God is still getting you through your situation, then you ought to not point the finger to yourself, but you need to point the finger up and say, God, thank you for who you are. Thank you for getting me through. Thank you for looking beyond my faults and blessing me with every one of my needs. There ought to be a thanksgiving in this place. I know we're going to eat turkey on Thursday. I know there's going to be some dressing in the oven. But when I wake up, I want to give thanks not to anybody else, but to God. Can I tell you, it'll help your worship become more real. When you know that where you are, it's not about you. Some things I looked at in my life, and I sit in my midnight hour and I say, Lord, how am I going to make it through? And as I'm looking at external situations on trying to deliver me, God poured into my heart and say, trust in me. Lean not to your own understanding. In all our ways acknowledge me, and I will direct your path. Somebody in here been in your midnight hour and nobody could help you, but you trusted, you leaned, you depended on God. He deserves all of the credit. God has a way of making us realize that where we are is only by the grace of God. Every now and then you ought to make the right proclamation and give credit to the who of God and the what of God in your life. Somebody in here should have a praise in your spirit. Somebody here should look at somebody else and say, if you only knew who was on my side. You ought to look to your neighbor and say, if you only knew what God has brought me from. You look at me now, and you look at how good I look now, but it's only by the grace. Not only